If you're not familiar with IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau US, we represent about 470 sellers of online advertising. Those are the websites. So for us, the ecosystem really is pretty straightforward. You have marketers who have the money, and they give their money to the ad agencies over here, who then purchase ads across IAB member publisher sites. And so anytime we put out a standard, anytime we have a policy position, anytime we're educating the industry, we always need to think about this ecosystem. We need to work with advertisers, we need to work with agencies, so that publisher solutions work for the entire ecosystem. So that's really a key point here. As Alan mentioned, I run the Washington, D.C. office for IAB, so I work on all of our legislative and regulatory work. Also serve as our general counsel, so do all of our legal work. And it's really a good confluence to talk about privacy and to talk about the self-regulatory program that we've built over the last couple of years. And it's taken a lot of time, because when you think about privacy, you may not think, oh, this is something that's going to help my bottom line, right? This is a cost center. If I have privacy restrictions, it means I can't do something, right? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to preserve that innovation, that third element that we talked about at the beginning. And we want, as a lawyer, my job is to make sure that you guys, the creative people, can continue to do and innovate the things that you do that make this medium so powerful. That's our whole goal. It's not to come in and say, we know better how to run a business. We're not creative people. We don't know how to do an ad campaign. We're not building content. We're trying to get out of your way and make sure that the legislation and regulators get out of your way so you can continue to do what you do best. That's always our goal. And we think it's important to put privacy forward as an industry, because it's probably our greatest strength, the data that we collect, the data we use to make advertising more powerful, the right message delivered to the right person at the right time. That's what digital is all about. And that takes data. It means frequency capping, making sure you don't hit the same person with the same message 18 times in a day. They're not going to click on that ad the 19th time you serve it if they haven't clicked the first 18 times. It means knowing somebody went to an auto site and now they're over here checking the sports scores. Well, maybe I want to serve them a car ad, behavioral advertising. Who's heard of online behavioral advertising? Everybody knows what it is. I think I'm going to expand the definition of OBA today for you, because many of you probably think, I know what OBA is. I know what behavioral advertising is. I do a little bit of it. I think the estimate in the US marketplace is it's about $2 billion a year. We're a $26 billion market in the US. And I beg to differ that 10% of our market, of the online ad spend, is actually online behavioral advertising. Because I think if you run your ad campaigns, you understand, you rely on data, that feedback loop, for virtually every ad campaign you run. So just very quickly, I want to welcome people to ask questions throughout the presentation. We have a little extra time today. Pamela couldn't make it, unfortunately. She's a great resource. It was a pleasure working with her when she was at the commission, and it's even better working with her now that she can't send us subpoenas and things like that. But I'll cover a little bit about the FTC, that was things that she would have talked about if she had been able to be here. So I just want to give a public policy update, a legislative update, because let's be honest, this industry didn't come together and say, we want to come up with new restrictions on privacy and on data sharing. Yeah, why would we do that? But about 3 years ago in the US, we saw that this legislative, this regulatory momentum was building, and that we as an industry needed to get out in front of this. So I welcome any questions. I don't want to talk too much about US bills and laws that haven't passed, but I think they help build a framework for what we're talking about. So about 2.5 years ago, the Federal Trade Commission, which is the United States chief enforcement agency, it's not a rule-making body per se. It really is full of enforcement, lawyers, prosecutors, investigators. They gave us a framework for how the industry could self-regulate, kind of a path to self-regulation. And it started out by redefining what's included in privacy. We used to always talk about personally identifiable information. Your name, your phone number, maybe your email address, your home address, things that we all think of as personally identifying. But in the digital space, that definition no longer works. Now, a cookie, an IP address, a web beacon on a website, all of these could be used to re-identify a person. They're not always inherently identifiable, but they can be. They can be used to identify a person. So in some ways, we have to live within this world of the possible instead of the real, of what's really happening. Because any academic can take 2 or 3 data points and they can re-identify somebody. You can take an IP address and a zip code and you can re-identify somebody. So we have to understand that it's just a fundamentally different discussion around privacy today than it was in the offline world. We're not talking, you don't want somebody's phone number, not for digital advertising, you don't. You may want it for other purposes. You may want their home address to then send them that, that brochure, that hard copy color brochure that costs you, $2.25 to mail to them, but that doesn't help you to serve them an ad on a website, on Facebook or something like that. So a broader definition of what we're talking about, personally identifiable information, no longer is the definition that we have to live under. We've always thought about identifying what the consumer concern is. And the FTC recognized that first-party activity, that's the website. When I go to the BBC.com, the BBC is the first party. I've gone as a consumer there. I've asked them for this content. I'm getting it for free. I understand there's a value exchange. I also understand that that website is going to collect certain information about me. They certainly are going to collect my IP address, right? Otherwise, how can they send me the content on the page? They're going to collect things like what type of browser I'm using. Otherwise, how is that content going to render properly on the page? But the real concern is about the third parties. And that's the advertiser, it's the agency, it's the ad network that may be serving the ad, it's the web analytics firm, it's the data aggregator on the back end that you're purchasing data from. All of these folks who are present on virtually every commercial website, that's what they're trying to get at by self-regulation. They're saying the consumer doesn't understand. There's no transparency that these third parties are here. Nobody knows what the ad network that is serving the ad is. Consumers don't even understand what an ad network is. When I started at the IAB 4 years ago, I wasn't really sure what an ad network was. When Google bought DoubleClick, I figured it out real quick. I knew that there was going to be privacy issues that were going to play out in Washington, D.C. So that's what they're concerned about. They also wanted to see us innovate around consumer notice. So us lawyers really like to create long privacy policies that cover every possibility of what we may or may not do as an organization. And part of that is because the Federal Trade Commission enforces against your stated practices in your privacy policy. So they had to be written by the General Counsel because you had to protect yourself. It became a liability. The privacy policy is no longer an effective vehicle for educating consumers about your actual privacy practices. So they wanted us to think outside of the privacy policy for giving notice to consumers. Easier said than done. And then they wanted an easy-to-use, ubiquitous opt-out of third-party data collection and use for advertising purposes, OBA. Now, look at the FTC principles, a fairly high level of understanding of how our industry works. First party, third party, we kind of understand what we can do here, right? It's because the FTC was fairly deliberative. They are not new to regulation in this space. In 1998 and 99, they helped the industry set up its first ever self-regulatory program in the Network Advertising Initiative. So they have a history here and they have some institutional knowledge. Not so much with the US Congress, not surprisingly. When you look at the legislative proposals, they have a different framework. The first thing they do is they say, well, the website, you consumers go to the website, let's put all the obligations on the website. The website has to control data, right? Who here thinks then a website controls all the information that is collected on the site and then sends it off to third parties? Who does that? Who has that does anybody have that relationship with a publisher? I'd love to know what publisher has that much control over their website, because my 470 publisher partners all tell me they don't have that kind of control with the third parties, right? Cookies are dropped through ads, through web beacons. Information is collected automatically in real time. It's not as if a publisher sits there and collects your web browsing history and then doles it out and sells it, each data point. That's just not the way the internet was architected. That's not the way websites were built. But that's how our Congress thinks about it, is, well, of course the website should be responsible. So that creates problems when they start putting out prescriptive notice requirements for publishers. Well, literally one of the proposals last year had a 16-point notice requirement for publishers, including what third parties were operating on the website, what data they were collecting, when, how they were going to use that data, downstream how they were going to use that data, and what their data retention policies were going to be. So imagine the BBC knowing every piece of data that their ad network partners are working with, how long they're going to keep that data, and how they may use it, a month, 6 months down the road. An impossible standard for a publisher to live up to. And then the idea then publishers should provide an opt-out for consumers. The concept then, as a consumer, I should be able to tell a publisher, don't collect any of my information, right? And we're not talking about PII anymore. It's one thing to say, don't collect my name, my email address. Now when you're expressly including cookies and IP addresses, query how a website would not collect your IP address. I mean, does that operationally make sense? Could the website actually operate? Could the website actually send you content if they weren't collecting your IP address? How would they even function? But these are the types of proposals we have. And then something that in the EU you're certainly familiar with, this idea of allowing consumers to opt in order for information to be collected. In this case, it's for third parties. So in the US, this is opt-in is reserved only for the most sensitive of information. In fact, in the US, you can use certain medical and financial information for marketing purposes without opt-in, consent from the consumer, just by providing an opt-out. So we're obviously much looser in these requirements than Europe traditionally has been. And then, of course, do not track. This idea that we're going to create a do not track mechanism has really picked up a lot of steam in the US over the last 3 or 4 months. And the concept is that consumers should be able to turn off all tracking online. And that creates other unique issues as well. And the idea that it should be done via a button on a browser, and a consumer just clicks, and suddenly data stops being collected. So these are the ideas. This very much is the impetus for industry self-regulation, although I like to think that we were ahead of this because we've been working on self-regulation for over 3 years. And you can see in July 2009, so some time ago, we put out our online behavioral advertising privacy principles. This was a cross-industry effort. It included the advertisers, the agencies, the publishers. We have a group. I think you have FEDMA here. We have the Direct Marketing Association in the US, which is kind of the 800-pound marketing trade association. They're the 800-pound gorilla in this space, very big, great partners of ours. We talked about education earlier today. We talked about transparency, consumer control. Those are the 2 principles out of the 7 that I'm going to focus on. All the other ones are important, but we don't have time to kind of sit and walk through them all. I will talk a little bit about accountability as well. So this was the document. It's publicly available, and it very much mirrors the FTC's principles that we talked about. Broad definition of OBA, what data is collected, and covered, enhanced notice outside of the privacy policy, and I'm going to walk you through what this really looks like for consumers, and an easy-to-use, comprehensive opt-out mechanism for consumers. That's really key. And making that opt-out persistent, meaning if I go to a website, an opt-out site, and I opt out of data collection, and that opt-out is effectuated by a cookie, then essentially is an opt-out cookie, and then my software security software comes through at the end of the month and deletes all of my cookies, including my opt-out cookies, that doesn't work very well. The consumer now has been opted back in, essentially, to targeting. So we're trying to make that persistent. This is a slide I took from the IAB Europe deck over a year ago. We knew in the US we wanted to try to build a global self-regulatory program. We didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. We needed to build something that was effective in the US. But the European market was working on this well over a year ago, trying to reflect the same principles that we had released. If you look at the top line, it's a 5-point strategy for an opt-out defense, trying to get out of this cookie directive of opt-in for cookies every time you set a cookie. You know, how do we defend our business model, which is dependent upon data collection and cookies being the prevalent technology? So you see their principles very much align with our own. And in fact, if this was coming up, if this event was in a couple of weeks, the IAB UK, Nick Stringer, who has done fantastic work in the UK and throughout Europe to build a self-regulatory program, he could give this presentation just as well as I could. They are very close to releasing their own program, and you'll see it looks very similar to our program. And the reason being, we all represent multinational companies. And so if you're a multinational company and you're operating in 5 dozen markets around the globe, you want to build your back-end systems once. You don't want to build them 12 or 5 dozen times. You want to build them once and have them be interoperable across the globe. And that's what we strive for, is sort of that harmonization across different marketplaces. There's some support here as well. Ed Vasey, a quote from less than 2 weeks ago about the importance of self-regulation, the fact that we're trying to look to the industry to self-regulate in this space. And so I think there's a degree of support here. And I think across Europe, there's this belief in the industry, at least around online behavioral advertising, that we can proactively self-regulate and that there may not be a need to push out these really onerous regulatory provisions that include things like opt-in for cookies. I'm not going to go through all the definitions. We talked a lot about OBA, but I think everybody should understand what we're really talking about is using people's web browsing history to send them a relevant ad, to make inferences about what we think their interests are, and to send them the right ad to the right person at the right time. That's what we're really talking about. It does not include the first-party activity that I discussed about the publisher, right? If a publisher is collecting certain information, that's not going to be covered. You know, if you're on the front page of your news site, and then you go to the sports section to read your sports scores, and then you go over to the lifestyle section, if they use your history, the fact that you had just read a sports score to send you an ad, right, for, you know, a Man U jersey, even though you're on the lifestyle section, that's okay. That's first-party activity. But if the ad network does it on that site, suddenly it's third-party activity, and you need that enhanced notice and consumer opt-out. So you look at this, and contextual advertising, of course, is not covered. So if I had that jersey on the sports site, because it's a sports site, contextual advertising is not covered. And so a lot of people look at this and they go, well, that's great. You know, this is most of what I do. But the reality is, when we, in the US, used that definition of online behavioral advertising, and we fed it back to the buy side of the industry, asking the agencies, the people who are buying campaigns, tell us what percentage of your ad campaigns fall under this definition. What percentage of them Drop cookies, do retargeting, frequency capping across sites. Over 80% of the online ad spend in the US would fall under these regulatory provisions. And I think that's really key. That's why we need to think about this. If we in the US have a $26 billion market, it's not $2 billion that would be impacted by regulation. What we think of as behavioral advertising, what you may sell as behavioral advertising, is very small. What the government thinks is behavioral advertising is very large. So the stakes are really high. Over 80% of our marketplace. So what did we do? And I really want to spend more time, less time on definitions, more time walking through the consumer experience. Because at the end of the day, the consumer experience is what really matters. So we created this icon, a ubiquitous icon, easy to understand, in ads, on websites, where data is being collected or where behavioral ads are being served. And the idea is that consumers will understand what this icon and the phrases that go along with it, ad choice, interest-based ads, why did I get this ad, and about our ads. Those 4 choices can go along with this icon. For the third party, you have to provide a choice, opt out. If you're collecting data and doing it for targeting. And then we created a single comprehensive industry opt-out page. I'm just going to walk you through. I'm going to show you what this looks like for the consumer. This could be any website. It just happens to be PC Mag, which is owned by Ziff Davis. This is a live trial that's running today. You can see the icon. I don't think anybody's going to complain about giving up this real estate on their website, are they? Is this valuable real estate? Has anybody tried to sell these pixels? Right? It's not very valuable. But what we've done is we've provided notice outside of the privacy policy, right? It's no longer in the privacy policy. We pulled it out. We said, we understand. The privacy policy is a legal document. Let's pull it out. Add choices. Little icon, you can't even see it. Who cares, right? For the industry, it's easy. But for a consumer, it's a consistent experience. All major websites will have this publisher notice. Consumers will know where to look. We're doing a consumer educational campaign to tell them about this icon. This is what it means. We've done testing around the icon with consumers. They understand I connotates information. We kind of call this thing the forward I. It kind of looks like a forward play button on your DVR or something like that. So you press it to go forward to get more information. And we believe over time, as consumers see this in the wild, as we do consumer education, they'll really understand, oh, okay, if I'm concerned, if I have privacy concerns, I just go here. And you may say, well, you know, it's at the bottom of the page. Consumers don't really care. Will they click through? The answer is they won't really click through to it. We know that. But if they do, this is what they get. Plain English notice, not written by lawyers, couple of sentences, very simple. This is one example. This is sort of a pop-up window. Other implementations could be simply you click, you go to a separate landing page with this information. You know, this is what kind of information is being collected on our site. And if you have a concern, click here to opt out. And it takes you to the industry opt-out page. It's very simple. You can also just have the add choices link redirect to the relevant portion of your privacy policy. So for most folks, most publishers already have that. The relevant portion in their privacy policy, their lawyers already figured out, oh, I need to disclose something about data collection.
Quick question, if people delete their cookies, does that mean they have to re-opt out of there?
Well, that's the key. We'll talk about that when we go to the opt-out page in a second. That's exactly right. And so, you know, Google introduced this fantastic option called Keep My Opt-outs. It's an extension on Chrome that works in conjunction with our opt-out page. And I'll show you our opt-out page in a minute. But it really helps us solve that persistency problem because they're going to build that out to be functional with Internet Explorer as well. And that really solves a lot of the persistency problem. All right, so consumers don't really go to the footer implementation that I just showed you on the publisher page, which is why we had to have third-party enhanced notice. This is notice in or around the advertisement itself. This just happens to be an AT&T ad on a website. Ad choices with the icon in the ad. And what happens if the consumer clicks on that? You get a pop-up that takes over the ad itself. Right? This is third-party notice. It's not publisher notice. So the third party can't take over the website, right? They don't own that real estate. That's the publisher's real estate. They own the ad space. And so they can take over the ad space. And again, very simple, a couple of sentences, easy to understand. This is the type of data we collect. This is how we use it. If you have any concerns, just click here to opt out. And we're going to take you to the industry opt-out page. It's going to be very simple. And so if a consumer clicks that to go to the industry opt-out page, look up at the top left, all participating companies. There are 61 companies listed on this opt-out page. These are third-party entities. We now have over 110 companies that are being onboarded to this site. And if you want to opt out, this is the most important button, most important feature of the entire self-reg program. Easy to use. If you want to opt out, one click, you're out of all participating companies. Very simple to use, easy to understand. It's kind of elegant. You know, when it populates in real time when you go to this site. It loads. It takes about 30 seconds, maybe a little bit less, to load. The middle tab says companies customizing ads for your browser, 47. So out of the 61 participating companies on this page, 47 of them have cookies and are doing targeting. So you can see in real time who's doing targeting to me, which third parties have seen me online and are sending me relevant ads. And you know, if you're in Washington, D.C., and you're a lawyer and lobbyist and you're working on Capitol Hill, and you come up with something like this, and you go home, and I tell my wife, and I said, look, let me show you this. This site is so great. This is like the sexiest thing a lawyer in Washington, D.C. will ever do. And then she looked at me, and she said, that's what you've been spending all this time on? Thoroughly unimpressed, but it works for consumers, and it works for our regulators, and that's the key. It's an easy system for consumers to utilize. Enforcement is key. Self-regulation is only as strong as the enforcement components that go along with it, which is why we partnered from day one with a group called the Council of Better Business Bureaus in the US. I know the European program is partnering with IASA. You have these third-party enforcement programs that have a long history, a great deal of respect from regulators, and they will enforce against the entire ecosystem, not just one group or the other, not just people who pay them or don't pay them, the entire ecosystem. That's the beauty of it. At the beginning, we talked about data collection. And the power of online is that we have this information. The power of self-regulation online is that we have technology and can track that information. And so we have technology vendors that can track the entire ecosystem and identify who's collecting information when and where, and then decide whether or not they're in compliance with our program. And we can call them out, and if they're an IAB US member, we passed our first ever membership code of conduct earlier this year. So any of our members have to be in compliance with this program. They have to publicly state that. If they publicly state that they're in compliance with this program and then they're found to not be, our Federal Trade Commission can bring an act against them as a deceptive practice. So there's real enforcement. That's the FTC backstop. And we think that this is going to work in the US. We think it's going to stave off some of those burdensome legislative proposals that we've seen. Do not track types of proposals.